Ladies and gentlemen, on today's episode, we have a down and dirty review on the new Abu Garcia Revo VoltIQ digital reels. We take a look at an interesting report of a very old tagged fish and just how far it traveled. We talk about our favorite soft plastic craws in this week's fishing poll. And in the mailbag today, we dive into frog setups, lure weighting, and the decreasing popularity in kayak fishing. Maybe. All that and more on this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast, brought to you by The Rod Locker. Premium gear and expert advice from a staff you can trust. Now, here's your host, Andrew Hayes.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Thank you for spending some time with us on this fine Tuesday. Before we get into our jam-packed episode today, we have to start out with a huge thank you to the folks that make this entire podcast possible, The Rod Locker. And everybody over at The Rod Locker is first class. If you are looking for a new tackle shop, whether that is in person or digital with today's internet age, I cannot stress enough how much I enjoy buying my gear through the Rod Locker. I have bought my gear through Brian and Chad from different companies over the years, but it's always been the same people that I'm dealing with. Brian, Chad, their whole team are incredible. They have an awesome selection of new and used fishing gear. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. I'm always perusing that used page because you never know what is going to pop up at a killer price. Half of that gear barely looks like it was used when you actually get it in the mail. I can't believe that some of the stuff is even marked as used. It looks like somebody bought it, breathed on it twice, and then decided they didn't want it. So there are some killer deals over on the used page, and they have some awesome offers going on right now. They have that boost on your trade-ins that we talked about last week. So if you have rods or reels sitting around that you're not using, I highly encourage you to go over to therodlocker.com and fill out that really quick questionnaire that will let you get a quote for your fishing gear. Then you can decide, hey, if that quote looks good, I'm going to send this stuff to the Rod Locker, and then boom, I get credit to use on the website for gear that I actually want. It really is that simple. So you can head over to www.rodlocker.com to check out everything the boys over there have to offer. And as always, you can use code TackleTalkAugust. It's going to save you an extra 5% off your order just for listening to the show. Thank you guys for being a part of what we do here at Tackle Talk, and the folks over at the Rod Locker want to reward you for that as well. So an additional 5% off that is usually sale stackable. There's no reason not to enter that at checkout. Tackle Talk August this month over at www.rodlocker.com. Okay, everybody, the first bit of news we have here today comes to us from John Hofling over at USA Today, who writes, Montana fisherman reels in elusive paddlefish after 22 years of evasion. And the article here says, an elusive 117-pound paddlefish that had evaded capture for 22 years has finally resurfaced after Montana fisherman Trevor Suisse reeled in the fish on June 12th at Seven Sisters Wildlife Management Area. The father of two was fishing with his children, Mason, 15, and Charles, 6, when he caught the fish. I cast into some slack water behind a sandbar, and I cast and hooked it instantly, Suisse told the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I started pulling, and it came really easy over the shore. I couldn't see it out of the water until I came back to the bank, and then I saw how big it was. The fish was originally caught on April 27, 2004 by North Dakota Fish and Game staff in the Missouri River. The staff were attempting to attach jaw tags to paddlefish to help estimate population within the area. In 2004, the fish was 49 inches long and weighed 90 pounds. It has obviously grown substantially in the last 22 years. When the Montana Regional Fisheries Manager, Mike Backus, saw the jaw tag, he was ecstatic because he knew that fish had been caught before. The fish is noteworthy considering its large size and the jaw tag being at large for 22 years, Back said. The Missouri River and Yellowstone River convene at the Seven Sisters Wildlife Management Area where Suisse caught the fish. Okay, so a few things that I want to get out of the way here really fast before I talk about more of the cool stuff about this article is, first, I think paddle fishing is bogus because it's snagging, right? That's the only way that you can catch paddlefish. Paddlefish eat plankton, they don't bite lures, so the way that you catch them is either sight fishing them or using electronics, or I guess you could probably troll treble hooks or something, but a giant weighted treble hook, and then you're hooking them really fast and snagging them. Everything that I hate about fishing is paddle fishing. using electronics to find some dinosaur fish chilling there, and then you're putting a giant weighted treble hook under it or beside it and then violently snagging it just to hook it and then fight it is so dumb. You can disagree with me, you can fight with me on it, but I hate it. I hate snagging of any kind, and that goes for paddlefish, that goes for game fish, anything in between. And then you're going to say, but Andrew, that's the only way to catch them. Well, then I guess there are just some fish that aren't meant to be caught. There's plenty of other fish species out there that you can catch without snagging them in a little bit more of a fair chase. So first off, right off the bat, I think snagging is lame. But the main reason that I brought this article up today isn't just to get on my soapbox about paddlefish snagging. It's to point out just how far this giant, old, gross dinosaur of a fish was traveling. Because I did some research and I did some quick looking over at Google Maps, and I found out that the spot where they originally tagged this fish back in 2004 was in Williston, North Dakota. And then the article says that they just recently caught this fish after 22 years at Seven Sisters Wildlife Management Area in Montana. So, folks, that is like 60 miles away from each other on the map, like as the crow flies. So this fish was traveling up and down the Missouri and Yellowstone rivers a minimum of 60 miles each way, and obviously likely much more than that. But the two definitive tag locations are 60 miles apart. And that to me is crazy because 60 miles seems to be anyway like a long way for a fish, especially a big old paddlefish, to swim up and down river. So the next thing that I did, and the next thing I think most people would do, was I started researching paddlefish and hey, how far do they actually travel? And then I was surprised to learn that some of those paddlefish swim hundreds, if not thousands of miles up and down river systems. Yes, thousands, not just hundreds. There was a study that I found of some tagged fish that had traveled upwards of 2,000 miles in the Mississippi River Basin. So ironically, I guess, now that you look back at this article, 60 miles is nothing for a paddlefish, I guess. I had no idea that paddlefish moved that much and that they were powerful enough swimmers, I guess, to handle thousands of miles in flowing rivers. So as I was reading this story and doing my own research, I just thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting. I would be really interested to learn how far some other species go up and down rivers because they're a little bit different than lakes. Like a lake, you can be a little bit more nomadic, I guess. On a river, I mean, it's just a highway. You go one way or the other. So it's kind of interesting to see how far these fish will travel and what they can get around as far as obstacles go and current and flooding and all that kind of stuff. So I thought it was interesting. I just figured I would bring it up today on the show as well. Okay, enough talking about paddlefish. Let's actually get to the freshwater fish that we all tune into the show each week to talk about, the almighty bass. And specifically, since, this is tackle talk, let's talk about some tackle used to target said bass. And this week, as I promised last week, we're going to bring you a good old-fashioned, down and dirty, no frills, no BS gear review that I've been wanting to do for the better part of like a month or two now since I got this reel. And I feel like I've put enough time in with it now to talk about it on the show. And that reel is none other than the Abu Garcia Revo VoltIQ. Yes, the reel we talked about a few months ago when it very first came out, the VoltIQ from Abu Garcia is Abu's first digital braking system reel that they've brought to market here in the US. And I wanted to make sure that I got my hands on one of these reels because this reel pairs two things that I'm not normally a fan of: Abu Garcia reels and digital reels. But it addresses one of the pain points that I actually have with Abu Garcia reels, which is I feel like they've gotten a little stale as a brand and with the offerings that they've kind of come out with over the past couple years. Like they're getting dusted by Shimano and Daiwa and even the Luz and Arcs and, Cast Kings of the world are putting out more new, interesting gear than Abu Garcia has as of lately, especially on the reel side. But that changed a few months ago when Abu Garcia kind of shocked a lot of people, myself included, by dropping a digital braking system reel from the clouds with like no real warning to us. And I said at the time, I'm not a huge Abu fan, but this is pretty cool. Like I like seeing them push the envelope a little bit and come into a market that has traditionally been dominated by one brand, Shimano, who has kind of been the king of digital reels. And they've gotten away with very little competition in the US market because of it. And we've all just kind of been sitting here waiting for these other companies to get with the program and give Shimano a run for their money, or at least give us as consumers more options to think of when we're looking for digital reels. And if you are in the market for a digital reel, you want more options. You want more competition. That helps with innovation. That helps with pricing. So it's a good thing when more people start to enter this sort of niche of the bait casting world, which is digital reels. And here's where I think you have to stop and think, who is the target demographic for a digital reel? And the truth is, I'm not the target demographic. I'm not the person that they are trying to reach with digital breaks, which is probably why I've never been a fan of them. A digital braking system reel at its core is designed for an angler who wants simplicity. They want like an intuitive reel that doesn't take a ton of adjusting or technical knowledge or even like broad understanding of how a reel works. They just want a reel that doesn't backlash and has simple, oftentimes less options or less settings on it. Simple, easy, set and forget type breaks and settings. That's what they want. And if it comes at the cost of, a little less casting distance or muffled performance, I guess, then so be it. Because that's not the most important thing to a digital braking reel owner. They're not obsessing over getting 3 more yards out of their cast. They're not obsessing over the overall weight of that reel and reducing it by, 0.1 ounces. They're not obsessing over micro adjustments to braking. They want a reel that, yes, maybe has a few small options to tweak, but overall, it just casts without ruining their day. Like just sort of a set and forget type reel. And that's why digital braking systems are so popular nowadays with younger anglers, with, I would say, slightly more novice anglers, or anglers that are just weekend warriors that want to go out and capitalize on the time that they do have, and they want to spend less time worrying about their gear, worrying about backlashes and issues and settings and all that kind of stuff. So at least in my mind, I think that's the target demographic for a digital braking reel. It's an end user that just wants simplicity, and they value that simplicity over like customizability, I guess. So over the years, I've used a Shimano Corrado DC, I've used an SLX DC, and I haven't held on to them for long. Like I've had them enough to get familiar with them, or at least feel like I know what I'm talking about when I'm using them, and then I sold them or kind of turned them loose very quickly. I just have enough experience to know that they're not my first choice of reel. I would rather have a dual braking system reel with an internal centrifugal braking adjustment, an external magnetic braking adjustment. I would much rather have that than a digital reel. I like the ability to fine tune and tweak and get really nerdy with the brakes on that reel and find those different combinations of both external and internal brakes to find that sweet spot specifically for me. And I don't really like that one size fits all approach of a lot of the digital reels. So that being said, when Abu Garcia dropped this VoltIQ though, I wanted to give it a fair shake because I actually do enjoy having my mind changed on things. I think that's good for you as a person, as a human. You don't just stay in your bubble. You don't just stay in your little silo. You don't be afraid to have your sort of preconceived notions shaken up a bit. And I actually think that's the fun part about testing a lot of fishing gear. I have a lot of very strong opinions, but I'm not afraid to have those opinions changed if I see fit. So that is why I picked up the new Abu Garcia Revo SX VoltIQ and I put it to work. Like I brought it out with me multiple times over months, and this is going to be our review here. So let's start with the specs first. There are 2 different models of this VoltIQ that you need to consider. There is the Revo X VoltIQ and there's the Revo SX VoltIQ. The X is like the basic version. The SX is more of like a slightly upgraded version. Now, the X, the bare bones version, has a C6 carbon frame. It has 7-to-1 bearings. It has 20 pounds of max drag, 85 yards of 12-pound line capacity, and it comes in at a price of $199.95, so under $200. And then if you make the step up to the SX, that's where you get that, whatever they call it, the X2, Craftic alloy aluminum frame, basically a metal frame. So you get a more durable reel. It's also a little bit smoother because it's got 9+1 bearings. You also get an upgraded drag. It has 25 pounds of max drag instead of 20. You do get a larger spool on the SX as well because it can now handle 115 yards of 12-pound instead of 85 pounds like the X can. And you get all of that for a $50 upgrade. So that SX VoltIQ, the higher one, has an MSRP of $249.95. So basically, you're looking at $200 and $250 for these reels. So you have those two models to choose from here, and I've played with both of them, but ultimately, I bought the Revo SX VoltIQ, the slightly more expensive one. And originally, I bought it solely because of the alloy frame. I'm a big aluminum, metal frame type guy. I would much rather have a metal frame on my casting reel than a plastic or carbon or whatever you want to call it. That's the bottom line. Like, I'm tough on my gear. I abuse my gear that I do buy, and I buy them to fish hard, not look pretty, not to save $2 here or there when it comes to something as important as the frame of that reel itself. So that is one thing that I will pay an upgrade fee for, is to get that metal frame. So I did that. That's why I went out and bought the SX version of this VoltIQ. Now, the one thing that we have to remember here as we examine these reels is that the reel itself is actually not really anything new. It's the braking system that we have to worry about, because we have some history with both of these reels without that braking system, because you can go out and you can buy a Revo X or a Revo SX, the regular versions. So those are the bones, I guess, or the body that the VoltIQ is built on. They're built into that existing Revo X, Revo SX platform. So if you hate the Revo X or you hate the Revo SX, then you're probably not going to fall in love with the X or the SX VoltIQ. But here's what I'll say, is that after using this VoltIQ and really putting it through the paces, it showed me that I might actually need to go back and give some of these reels that I've disliked for so long another try. Because even though they're not going to be my favorite by any means, I think a lot of them have made improvements or aren't as bad as I remember, I guess. You know how it is, right? If you have something that you really didn't like 10 years ago, well, over time, you start to almost exaggerate the things that you didn't like about that thing. Your brain just keeps telling you you didn't like it, and it gets worse and worse in your mind because you're reinforcing that opinion over and over and over again without actually touching that gear or taking a step back and saying, you know what, maybe I need to revisit that and get a little bit of a refresher so I don't have this sort of syndrome where I'm thinking that this was worse than it really was. So I think I might actually remember a lot of these Abu reels being a little bit worse than they actually are, because as time passed, my memory sort of either skewed them a bit or Abu Garcia has made some improvements. I don't know. That's my theory, because I don't really know how else to explain how kind of pleasantly surprised I was with this reel. Now, the braking system itself on both models is a very simple, like 1 through 10 dial to set the brakes. That's it. You don't have to worry about anything inside. There's no other settings to mess with. It is a 1 through 10, so kind of as easy as it gets to set. And the one thing that this VoltIQ has going for it over something like a Shimano Corrado DC is that it has more customization. Like when you get a Corrado DC, when those came out, there were like 4 options on that reel to pick, 1 through 4. So not a lot of customization or tweaking ability. Now, the great irony here, like we talked about earlier, is that in a lot of DC buyers' minds, that's actually a good thing. Remember, most DC buyers want simplicity, so 1 through 4 actually works for them. But there are plenty of other DC users that would probably like a little bit more control or a little bit more ability to fine-tune and adjust, and the VoltIQ does at least give you that. So there are 10 settings on this VoltIQ that are actually labeled by Abu Garcia, and they classify them as settings 1 through 3 are called Pro Mode, and that basically gives you the least amount of braking possible. So those settings are going to be for like maximum casting distance and minimal assistance from your DC brakes. So there's more chance for you to mess up, but also you can make longer casts because you're not as hindered by that DC putting the squeeze on your cast. And then once you get past setting 3, then if you get to 4, 5, and 6, that's what Abu calls the sweet spot. And that's kind of their, I guess, optimal mix of control and casting distance. That's where a lot of the savvy users, I think, will fall most of the time, is that 4, 5, and 6, depending on your preference, your lure weight, the wind, all that kind of stuff. And then you go down to like 7, 8, or 9 on the dial, and those are called their advanced control. And that's where you're getting more braking and more deceleration from that DC chip, which is nice if you're throwing in heavy wind, if you got super heavy baits or heavy line that's less friendly for you to mess with, or if you're just not super comfortable with a bait caster, then you're going to be in that 7, 8, or 9 range a lot of times. And then you can go to number 10, which is their maximum setting. And that's as much help as you can possibly get from that digital chip when you're casting and applying those brakes. So you're going to lose some casting distance there for sure, but you'll gain more protection from backlashing because those brakes are more clamped down on you. So when I was using this reel, I actually stayed somewhere in between 2 and 3 a lot of times, which ironically kind of defeats the purpose of the DC reel because you're not getting much, quote unquote help from the digital brakes at 2 out of 10, but it does definitely still apply some help to you. It's definitely not wide open like it would be on a conventional casting reel if you flipped all of your brakes off. There is still something there that's helping you. It's just not going to save you from catastrophic backlashes and things like that. It's just applying a little bit of help here and there. Now, I won't lie, it did save me one time when I was casting, I think it was a spinnerbait, and I went in my back cast like you do in a kayak, and I hit my rods that were behind me because I got a little too overzealous on my back cast, and boom, it blew up my reel. Now, the thing is, it blew up my reel a lot less than it would have on some of my other reels. Like, it would have taken me 10 minutes probably to get that rat nest out of many of my other reels. With this VoltIQ, even on like a 2 or 3, it did obviously bird nest, but it wasn't nearly as bad as it would have been on some of my other reels. I feel like it stopped itself a little bit quicker and prevented like full catastrophe in a situation like that, even with the brakes not like super applied. If that bird nest was like a 4 out of 10 bad, I bet it would have been a 7 or 8 on a lot of my other reels. So that's something, I guess. All right, everybody, we'll get back to the episode here in just a second. But first, the Tackle Talk podcast is brought to you in part by Humminbird. And when you're out on the water, seeing fish is one thing, but seeing everything that's happening around those fish is a whole different advantage. That's why you need Humminbird. Pairing Humminbird Explore fish finders with MegaLive 2 live sonar gives you the simplest way to see it all. We're talking side imaging, down imaging, Lake Master and Coast Master mapping included, so your maps are up to date. You have advanced imagery. You have a really incredibly intuitive interface with a bright, easy to read HD screen. All of that helps you find the areas that you want to target before you even make a cast. And then when it's time to fish, MegaLive 2 actually gives you real-time views of what's happening underneath your boat. You can see fish, you can see structure, you can see bait, you can see and track your lure, all with enhanced contrast, target separation, and the legendary clarity that you expect from Humminbird. So instead of guessing what's happening down there under the water, you can see it, you can react to it, and you can make that perfect cast. All of that with Humminbird Explore and MegaLive 2. For more information, you can go over to www.humminbird.com to see clearer and fish smarter. The Tackle Talk podcast is also brought to you in part by Minn Kota. And when you do finally find the places that you want to fish and you find the fish that you're targeting, the last thing you want is your boat moving off that spot. And that's why so many diehard anglers turn to Minn Kota Ultrexes. Ultrex is built specifically for bass fishing, giving you unmatched control of your boat and the confidence to lock down on those fish that you find. You have an ultra-responsive foot pedal, providing effortless steering so you can make precise adjustments while you're out there, while also keeping your focus on the actual fishing. And when you find that sweet spot, Spot Lock will actually make sure that you don't leave that spot. Because when you push that button, Minn Kota's industry-leading GPS anchoring technology helps keep your boat right where you want it, even if the wind or the current are trying their best to move you. There's a reason that professional anglers trust Ultrex. It's built with the rugged durability and reliability they need when they're competing at the highest level. So when you find the fish, don't let your boat give them a chance to get away. Take control, hit that spot lock button, and hammer down. That is the Minn Kota Ultrex. So for more information about the Ultrex or any of the other Minn Kota motors, you can head over to www.minnkotamotors.com. Now, I have been bumping my brakes up just for the sake of testing it over the last few months. And rather than go like super nitty gritty here, I'm going to try and make this as broad and easy as possible to understand. 10 for me was way too much all of the time. Like I would never, ever, ever have it on 10 if it were me. I did not like that whatsoever. And then I used down to like 7 or 8 every once in a while out of 10. But even then, like if I was throwing a huge bait on 7 out of 10 and I just wanted to see how far I could throw it and have minimal thumbing on it, it did pretty well. Again, I don't think I was casting further than I would have been if I would have just had one of my traditional reels dialed in right. But if you were like trying to do a test where you're using very minimal or no thumb at all, then you could get away with casting further with little or no thumb than I could have with my other reels, because you would have had to engage the brakes so much more that you would have lost a lot more casting distance than this VoltIQ let you have. So there is something to be said for the people that either have very little or no experience thumbing a spool. The DC reel is definitely going to help you out a lot. But I feel like I could, if I had to, live in that 4 to 5 setting range for normal fishing, and I wasn't missing a ton in the way of casting distance. Definitely some reduction, but not like a deal breaker by any means. But again, I felt at home in that kind of like 2 to 3 range. I think that gave me a decent mix of still feeling like the DC was doing something, like kind of taking a little bit of the edge off of some of those casts while still letting me control how I wanted that cast to go with my thumb and not feeling like I was so hindered by those breaks. But the reel itself isn't really made for that. A lot of the DC reels aren't targeted at people who feel at home with their brakes dialed way down or all the way down on a conventional casting reel, and they don't really need much braking help. If you feel comfortable with a casting reel with the brakes basically all the way down and you doing, 90 to 100% of the work with your thumb, then don't pay the money for a digital reel, because it's a waste of time in general. That doesn't just go for the VoltIQ, that goes for any digital reel. You're not really the person that digital reel is going to help a whole lot and worth the money to pay. So really, this review isn't for me. It's for me like 10 years ago, maybe, or 20 years ago. And do I think that, Andrew 10 to 20 years ago would have benefited from using a reel like this? Yes, I think I probably would have. I think I would have liked to have something like this back then because it would have helped me out. It would have given me more confidence. It probably would have saved me a lot of backlashes and a lot of headaches and a lot of curse words out there on the water. I do think it would have helped me. It's almost like riding a bike with training wheels on it, or bowling with like the bumpers up a little bit. You're still riding a bike, or you're still throwing a bowling ball and knocking down pins, but there's a little bit of an added layer of protection there that also hinders your freedom a little bit. And for some people, that makes that activity much more enjoyable. And for others, it makes that activity so much less enjoyable. It just matters on whether you like want or need that assistance, or whether you look at it as a hindrance. And that's what I felt like with this reel. I feel like certain people who are in the DC crowd in general, are going to think this is a really solid choice, and it's definitely worth looking at. So let's hit like some, I guess, overall pluses and minuses with this reel that I found. Number one is price. I'm going to give it a positive on price. That's the big thing that this reel has going for it, because at $199 to $249, it's significantly cheaper than something like a Shimano Corrado DC, which is now going to be $315 with the new model coming out. So that's anywhere from $65 to $115 cheaper. And that's a big deal. That puts this more on par with like an SLX DC probably, which is $225. And then these two reels, these two VoltIQ models, are right on either side of that SLX DC. The X VoltIQ is $75 cheaper, and the SX VoltIQ is $25 more. So a very smart, competitive price range here for Abu Garcia. Our number two positive here is that I think it has more customization. Like, you're getting 10 braking settings where a lot of the other competitors are going to give you a lot less. So if you like the ability to fine tune your settings a little bit more, this is going to give you more options. Positive number three, I think, is actually going to be ergonomics. And I guess it's just been a while since I've picked up a Revo SX in general, but it's very comfortable holding it in your hand. And I'll admit that it probably took me a few minutes to get used to, because I am used to using more symmetrical, almost boxy feeling reels a lot of times. But this has that sort of asymmetrical swoop to the front of that reel, right on the outside of the worm shaft where your index and your middle fingers sit. It was very comfortable even after like long days of fishing. It's comfortable pointed up like you're working a jig or a Texas rig. It's comfortable pointed down like you're working a crankbait. It's comfortable actually twitching like a spook or a jerkbait. I thought the ergonomics overall were pretty pleasant on this reel after playing with it for a few months. And then positive number 4, I think, is actually going to be spec-wise. I think when you compare the SX VoltIQ specifically, the one that I bought, the $250 one, if you compare that with a $315 Shimano Corrado DC, they're basically the exact same weight, but you get twice the drag with the VoltIQ. The Corrado DC has 13 pounds of drag. The SX VoltIQ has 25 pounds of max drag. The SX VoltIQ also has 9+1 bearings, where the Corrado DC has 6+1. Now, again, I know that bearing count is not the end-all be-all of smoothness, but on pure specs, the VoltIQ SX does punch above its price point. And price point, all with the same weight, both have metal frames. All things considered, I do think the SX VoltIQ is a good value at $250. Now, the negatives here, I guess I'm going to give the VoltIQ a negative when it comes to the amount of options of gear ratios, because the Abu Garcia Revo VoltIQs come in a 6.7 to 1 and a 7.3 to 1. So there is no real high gear option. There's no 8 to 1 in this lineup. And that's something that you should probably consider. Like, I think most people are going to be very happy with that 7 to 1. That's what I'm using, and it's fine. But if you're one of those people that really likes to burn baits and burn line back in, you are limited to 2 gear ratios, unlike Shimano, which will usually give you 3. The other gripe that I'm going to have with this reel, and it's more of like a gripe with all DC reels in general, but not specifically to the VoltIQ, is that I just hate the sound of DC reels. I hate the whine. It's annoying to me, but I also actually understand that that's why a lot of people buy DC reels, because they like that cool sound. It's actually a positive for a lot of people, but me being the old school kind of like, man balling his fist up, yelling at clouds that I am, I'm not a huge fan of the sound of DC reels. But for the 100th time, I'm probably not the target demographic for this reel. So I will set that aside for a second and just give you my overall thoughts, I guess. So overall, I guess to summarize my thoughts on the Abu Garcia Revo X and the Revo SX, both the VoltIQ versions, I think first off, I would pay the extra $50 and get the Revo SX VoltIQ at $250. For $50, it's smoother, it's more powerful, you get more line capacity, and you get a way more durable reel. So to protect the investment that you're making, do yourself a favor and just get the SX. Don't mess with the X. That's my advice to you. If you're interested in this reel, sack up, pay the extra $50. You're going to be glad you did. And then from there, I think the $250 Revo SX VoltIQ is a pretty strong option. I think if you're on a budget and a $315 or up DC reel is just a little too rich for your blood, like it is for mine, then I think the $250 SX VoltIQ is a really fun reel that should be pretty comparable to some higher end DC reels, at least from the braking technology alone. The DC brakes in the Revo SX seem to me to be somewhat on par with the DC brakes that I've used in Shimano's before. Now, the reel itself is very different. Again, this is built on a Revo SX platform. Something like a Shimano is either built on an SLX or a Corrado platform. So you have to kind of think about not just the engine you're putting in the car, but the shell in the car itself. You can put any engine you want into a car, but if that car you're putting the engine into is a 1998 Dodge Neon, well, then it's only going to be so good and so cool, right? It can have the most incredible stuff under the hood. If you're putting it in a crappy car, you have a crappy car with an awesome engine. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying that the Revo is a bad platform. I'm just saying there are definitely people who do not like the Revo. And if you don't like the Revo, you're starting behind the 8 ball in terms of liking this new VoltIQ reel. So I think it's a good value play for anyone that's looking for a, sharp, solid performing DC reel with a metal frame and a strong drag. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I kept picking this reel up over and over again on the water. I had a lot of fun with it. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend it. I would just personally steer you away from the X and toward the SX if it were me. And again, for you frugal penny pinchers out there like I am, instead of paying the full $250 for something like an SX VoltIQ, if you go over and check out our boys over at the Rod Locker, I think they have some of these over at the shop. I definitely saw them when I was over there a few months ago, and I think they still have some. And if you use a certain code, wink, wink, nod, nod, Tackle Talk August at checkout, it can get these reels down to like $237, I believe, which makes it even better. $237 for the better SX version of the VoltIQ gets a thumbs up for me. This reel is going to stay with me. I'm not getting rid of it anytime soon, so that should tell you something. It's going to be on one of my everyday setups for the time being, and I don't have any plans of taking it off anytime soon. So yeah, there's our review on the Abu Garcia Revo VoltIQ. If you guys have one of these and you have thoughts on it, feel free to shoot me an email, shoot me a message. I love to hear your thoughts on it as well. But yeah, overall, I think it's a solid option that I would have no problem recommending to somebody that's in the DC market.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Fishing Pole. Brought to you by Minn Kota. Adventure awaits at minnkota.com.
All right, everybody. Next up here, let's jump to our next segment, and that's going to be this week's fishing pole presented by Humminbird and Minn Kota. And last week, we got a little bit more personal, a little bit more heartfelt. We talked about who taught you to fish. This week, I think we're going to go back straight down the middle here. We're going to do some good old-fashioned tackle talk. As we asked you guys, what is your favorite soft plastic crawl? I mean, I don't think it gets much more straightforward bass fishing than that. Your favorite all-around craw. A craw is easily one of the, top 2 or 3 shapes in the soft plastic world for bass fishing. I mean, you have worm, craw, bait fish. I would say those 3 are probably your main 3. Creature baits, I guess, sort of blur the line with craws and bug shapes and stuff like that. I guess you could add that as a 4th one. But craw is easily 1 or 2 in terms of popularity. So we're going to talk about some craws here today, and I think we're going to see a lot of answers. But for me, myself, I'm actually going to try and give you my one answer this week. I always feel like I kind of get a little cheeky with it, and I ask you guys to submit one simple answer, and then I get the luxury of actually explaining my answer and then saying, well, this would be my top answer, but here's my 2 or 3 other options. So at least today, I'm going to do my best to give you an actual single pick. Yes, I will probably explain some more on the back end, but I'm actually going to try and not waffle and say, hey, here is definitively my number one answer if I was going to submit my answer to the mailbag this week. So I think if I would have got on tackletalkpodcast.com and clicked fishing pole this week and had to submit an answer, I think I probably would have written in net bait pack-a-craw. And that's probably going to be my favorite craw on the planet if I had to just pick one. And I think it's for a couple reasons. I think one, the pack-a-craw is my favorite craw on the fall, which is the single most important thing to me in a craw bait, is how do those claws move when they're actually falling at different speeds with different weights on. So I judge a craw a lot of times by how it looks on a Texas rig with an 1/8 ounce, a 3/16 ounce, a 1/4 ounce, a 3/8 ounce, a 1/2 ounce weight. I want to see how those appendages flap and change at different weights. And unlike a lot of the other popular choices here, the pack-a-craw can do a little bit of everything because at slow speeds or, smaller weights, it has a little bit more of this free-flowing, tantalizing look to it rather than the more aggressive, rhythmic crawls that you're going to see probably pop up a little bit later. Like on a 1/16 or a 1/8 ounce weight, even a 3/16 ounce weight, it's got this really nice flow to it. But then as you bump up that weight or you work it a little faster or you work it a little bit more jerky, those claws can get some really good movement to it. But you do get to control it a little bit more, I guess. So some other baits that we'll, again, talk about here in a minute, just kind of go 0 to 100 really fast. Like if they're moving, they're flapping pretty dang hard. With a pack-a-craw, I just feel like you get this really nice middle ground to its movement. So the pack-a-craw is going to be my number one for me. They're really affordable at under $5 a pack. They have good sized packs. They come 8 to a pack, 9 to a pack, or 10 to a pack, depending if you buy the 3-inch, the 3.75-inch, or the 5-inch versions. They come in a ton of different colors, inexpensive, readily available, and they have that very nice, versatile action. So to me, that's my winner. If I had to pick one craw, I think I'm probably going with the pack-a-craw. Now, with that out of the way, I picked my number one answer. That's what I would have submitted. I will give you some of my honorable mentions here. My first honorable mention is going to be the Yum Christie Craw. You guys know me. If you've listened to Tackle Talk, you knew this was going to be on here. It has to be. I still think it's criminally underrated. It's dirt cheap. It catches the snot out of fish. It's got that really nice semi-aggressive action, I would say, but you get that action with a lot less bulk because the claws are very small. The body is very streamlined, but you still get that good, consistent action. So I use a Christie Craw on jigs a lot. That seems to be where I reach for it because it doesn't add a lot of unnecessary bulk to those jigs. It just adds that action and that profile that I want. I also use it on a Texas rig and I flip it around a lot around pressured fish or when I'm trying to downsize a little bit. The Christie Craw definitely makes my list. Next honorable mention is, of course, the Rage Craw. Like, you can't not have it on your list somewhere. If you need movement the Rage Craw is the deal. Some other ones you'd have to put on here, I think you'd have to put the Zoom Speed Craw. You'd have to put the fairly newcomer, but the Rapala Cleanup Craw is a really good one. And then there's a bunch of others. Like I'm sure we're going to see Bandito Bug on here from Guggen. You're going to see Berkeley Chigger Craw probably. I would guess you're going to see the X-Zone, either Muscleback or Adrenaline Craw, the Yamamoto Yama Craw. I think you'll see a lot of big names on this list. And then I think you might see some smaller stuff from the Finesse or Smallmouth guys too. Like I wouldn't be surprised if you see the Juvie Craw or the Snack Craw from Great Lakes Finesse pop up on here. But for me, I think the Netbait Pack Craw is going to be my number one. So my vote is cast. Now let's see where you all landed. So I'm going to open this up now. And your winner for the top soft plastic craw from the Tackle Talk listeners is the Rage Craw. That's going to be our big winner this week. The Rage Craw is your top choice by a pretty wide margin, actually. 28.9% of responses in this week's fishing poll said the Strike King Rage Craw. And that is a pretty healthy victory here for the Rage Craw. And I mean, it's probably to be expected. I think most people, if you ask them, they would say that the Rage Craw is at least the most popular craw out there, even if it's not their favorite. So I'm not really surprised by that. 28.9% is a lot for one single answer when you have so many other options. But yeah, just under 30% picked the Rage Craw. Now here, as I'm looking at this list, is where it actually gets interesting, because in second place, by another pretty healthy margin over third place, is the Crush City Cleanup Craw, a craw that has been on the market for like under 3 years. A relative newcomer in the craw world is your consensus number 2 pick here with 13.5% of the vote. And then everything else here had like single digits. A lot of this has under 5%. And then even below that, there's going to be a ton that are going to be in like the 1 to 2% range. But in third place, you have the Guggen Bandito Bug. And I knew this was going to be on here, but I didn't figure it would be that high in the top 3. That's interesting. Fourth place went to my pick, the Pack Craw from Netbait. So I think that's fair. Fifth place is the Guggen Kraken Craw. So 2 Guggen baits in the top 5. Number 6 is my guilty pleasure, the Yum Christie Craw. 7th place went to the Strike King Rage Menace. Number 8 went to the Nico Baits Nico Craw. Number 9 was the Reaction Innovations Sweet Beaver. Number 10 was the Yum Craw Bug. Number 11 was the X-Zone Adrenaline Craw. Kind of crazy to me that that's not higher on here. And then you had number 12 is the Zoom Z Craw. And then you had the Megabass Sleeper Craw. You have the XPS Crawdiddy. And then all the way down at the bottom, we have some other ones. We have 6 Sense Stroker Craw. We have the Berkeley Crud Craw. The Berkeley Chigger Craw is way down there, which is crazy to me. The Biz Bug from Biz Baits. The Yama Craw is on there from Yamamoto, again, pretty far down, and then some more there. So interesting stuff. There are definitely some baits that I feel like should have been higher, and there are some baits that I am surprised they are as high as they are. But your top 5 here from today's fishing poll were 5th place, the Guggen Kraken Craw, 4th place, the Netbait Pack Craw, 3rd went to the Guggen Bandito Bug, 2nd was the Crush City Cleanup Craw, and the number 1 answer, as voted on by you, the Tackle Talk listeners, for your top soft plastic craw was the Strike King Rage Craw. So there you go. Thank you all for voting. I appreciate it. It definitely makes the show way more fun when more and more of you cast your votes. So you can head over to tackletalkpodcast.com today, and you can click fishing poll at the top of the page, and you can go over there and vote for next week's fishing poll. All right, everybody. And finally, we're going to get to the mailbag here in just a second. But before we do, the Tackle Talk podcast and the mailbag are powered by Amped Outdoors. If you're serious about fishing, you know how important reliable power is. Your electronics, your forward-facing sonar, your trolling motor, you need batteries that you can count on when you're out there on the water. And that's why I and so many other anglers choose Amped Outdoors. Amped Outdoors specializes in high-quality lithium batteries specifically designed for anglers, with options for everything from boat electronics to trolling motors to kayak motors, ice fishing. We're talking 12-volt, 24-volt, 36-volt, all kinds of battery options over there at Amped Outdoors. And these aren't just batteries that are lightweight. Yes, that's a great part about lithium batteries, but Amped Outdoors uses top-tier A-grade components and an industry-leading 10-year no-hassle warranty. They also have Bluetooth monitoring on many of their batteries, so you can keep an eye on your battery's performance right there from your phone. heated charging on a lot of their batteries, so many great options and features over there at Amped. And the one thing that I really like about Amped Outdoors is they actually focus on educating anglers so you can choose the right battery that actually fits your setup. If you go to their website, it is a wealth of knowledge in terms of battery choice, what electronics draw how many amps, and all that kind of stuff. You can figure out the exact battery you need over at the Amped Outdoors website. So before your next trip, check out Amped Outdoors over at www.ampedoutdoors.com and get the power you need to stay on the water longer.
This is the Tackle Talk Podcast Mailbag, powered by Amped Outdoors, your source for premium, affordable lithium batteries.
All right, our first question here today in the mailbag, powered by Amped Outdoors, is from Jackson, who says, "Hi, this is Jackson. I'm 14 years old, and I recently caught the bass bug. I bike 5 miles every morning to a local lake in Maine, and it is very weedy. Anyway, now to my question. Everybody says you should throw topwater frogs on a heavy casting rod and like 50 to 65 pound bread." I think he probably means braid there. That's pretty heavy bread, 50 to 65 pound bread. Yeah, we're going to assume braid here. He says, "I was wondering because I usually throw a topwater frog on my one spinning rod, which is a medium heavy and 30 pound braid. Is there any benefit to switching to a casting rod and upping my pound braid? Thank you for a wonderful show. I've gone back and listened to every episode, and every time I do, I learn something new." Well, hey, Jackson, thanks for writing in. I appreciate it, man. I'm jealous that you're up in Maine. Every picture and video I see of Maine looks awesome. I wish that I lived in a place that looks that cool. But frogging, yeah, man, you're going to want a casting rod and heavy braid at some point. I'm not saying that you can't catch frogfish on your spinning rod with 30 pound braid, because you can. You obviously can. It sounds like you've probably done it before, but it's not optimal. And I said something a long time ago, and I still stand by it. There are not a lot of things that are for certain in the fishing world. Like almost everything is up for debate. I think there are very few 100% right and wrong, black and white things. And that's what makes fishing so much fun to talk about and do. But one of the very few things that like 99.9999999% of people agree on is that you should have a casting rod and heavy braid for frogging. And that in and of itself should tell you something, that many people agree on it in an industry where nobody agrees on anything. So yeah, I would say adding a casting setup at some point is going to be something you're going to want to do for frog fishing if you want to do it well. You can get away with 50 pound for sure, talking about your braid. I prefer 65 because you just get some extra comfort and peace of mind, but 50 pound will work. You'll also get a little bit longer casting distance with 50 pound braid, and I would get a heavy casting rod at some point. You can do it on a medium heavy for sure, but for me, a heavy is preferred. And you asked about the reasons why. I'll give you the reasons why I think that you should have a setup like that. It's leverage, torque, and strength. You want as much power in that setup as you can. 1, to drive the hook home. 2, to keep that fish pinned. And 3, to horse that fish through the slop. Like all of that means zero slack in your line ever. You are keeping that line as tight as possible. You want as much pressure on that fish as you can. And heavy braid has no stretch, and it's not going to snap on you. And then your heavy casting rod has the backbone to withstand those violent hook sets and the stress that you're going to put that rod under when you're fighting that fish back through the weeds and the pads and the slop that you're fishing in. So yeah, I would say highly, highly, highly recommend looking into a good heavy casting rod if you're serious about getting into frog fishing. All right, the next question here is from Nick, who says, "Hey, Andrew, longtime listener, first-time caller. I absolutely love your show, and I wanted to ask you a couple questions. When you came down to Texas for that Berkeley event a couple years ago, what were your thoughts on Lake Houston? It's a 15-minute drive for me, and I'd rather drive an hour to be anywhere but there. My second question is, do you think kayak tournaments are dying? I run a nonprofit that is based around tournaments raising money for children fighting cancer and other illnesses, and we are seeing less participation this year versus previous years. What factors do you think go into decisions on whether or not to fish a tournament?" Well, hey, Nick, I appreciate it. Thanks for being a first-time mailbagger here. I appreciate it. Welcome to the mailbag, my friend. The first question is an easy one. When I went down to Houston for that Berkeley Science Symposium a couple years ago, I went for all, whatever it is, 3 days that we were down there. I didn't really get to fish much while we were down there. I did go out with Justin Atkins on his boat for a little bit out on Lake Houston, just to try out some baits and some of the stuff that we were there to learn about. But it had rained and it was so blown out and muddy back in that creek arm that we were in that we really honestly didn't do much fishing. So I can't give you a real review on Lake Houston, but yeah, safe to say that when we were there, it definitely sucked. Your other question, though, is an interesting one to think about. Do I think kayak tournaments are dying? Dying, no, but on the decline is a whole different question worth asking. I think on the big stage, like national trails, no, I don't think it's dying. But at the local level or the grassroots level, I think you might be seeing some leveling off of the pandemonium and the rapid growth that kayak fishing enjoyed for the past 5 or 10 years. And the answer, I don't think really is that deep. I don't think it's the industry pricing out people or how expensive kayak setups are getting or forward-facing sonar, any of that. I just think it's because kayak fishing is not the cool new thing anymore. Competitive kayak fishing, if you think about it, is relatively new. Like the very first Hobie BOS series was in 2019. So it's only like 7 years old. It's not like Bassmaster that had been around since like the 70s. So when competitive kayak fishing and tournaments first started taking off, I think there was a natural lift or excitement to them. It was new. It was a way for guys and girls who couldn't or didn't want to get into the boat world to still compete in fishing. I think it was the new kid in town and that lane was kind of wide open. And now I think things are settling down. I think you're starting to see that in real life. It's not just the cool new thing anymore. I think kayak fishing is still doing well, but like everything else in the world is that there starts to be this honeymoon phase that dies off. And when you pair that with the fact that kayak fishing competitions really got ramped up and then hit their heyday right during COVID, and COVID was this huge artificial like boom to kayak fishing in the outdoors in general, and then everybody kind of came back down to earth. I think that's probably what you're seeing. So yeah, I think that's my analysis of kayak fishing. I don't think it's dying. I just think that the first big initial boom of kayak fishing is subsiding a little bit. All right, and then our final question here is from Ryan, who says, Andrew, I'll refrain from the mandatory, Andrew, you're a total genius, legend, bean wizard intro that seems to come with every other listener question, but seriously, I love the show. I'm a 44-year-old who got sober 5 years ago and is now completely obsessed with fishing. It has genuinely changed my life and brought back a hobby I'd forgotten that I loved so much as a kid, and I've learned so much from your show. Thank you. So, I fish a lot of similar West Virginia water. The new, shallower greenbrier and slower multi-species elk, all from the bank or kayak, not deep lakes. I naturally stay finesse, soft plastic, smaller jerk baits, compact spinner baits, poppers, wake baits, etc. I rarely throw anything more than 3/8 ounce. You're a hammer and similar, well, I don't know about that, but on similar water and often fish 3/8 ounce and up. So I know I'm probably missing something. Can you explain when the heavier power approach is better than downsized finesse in these shallow rivers? What cues like season, current, clarity, coverage, forage, or fish mood make you choose one over the other? And then he signs off by saying, everybody stay humble and honest. It will take you places. Thanks, Ryan. Well, Ryan, that's funny, man. First off, I appreciate the refrain from the obligatory compliment of the show to like start off at the beginning of the question. It's so funny because it seems like it's become this sort of like weird unwritten rule where I'm almost afraid that people feel like they have to do that or they feel like it's just become the normal format for a mailbag question. But I swear, guys, you do not have to do that at the beginning of every question. Like, I appreciate it very much, but please do not feel like you have to start every mailbag question by saying something nice about me or about this show. It definitely doesn't increase your chances of getting picked. It's just kind of ironic because as I look at the submissions, like I'm on the page right now where you guys submit these questions and I can see like the first couple sentences of every question in like a preview pane before I click on the full question. Almost every one of these, like probably 95% of these start out with some sort of like really nice compliment or really nice like heartfelt thing. And I really do appreciate it, I promise, but you guys do not have to do that. Like you can just submit a question. And Ryan, I do appreciate your question that you submitted. So let's get to that question. You said lure sizes and lure weights. If we're fishing very similar waters, which it sounds like we are, here's my sort of revelation that I've come to over the years. I used to think that smaller meant more bites. Like especially with smallmouth, maybe not always catching giant fish, but I thought the smaller bait that I had, the more bites I was going to get, because I figured that smaller was more widely appealing to more fish. Like it was less intimidating or less off-putting. It should spook less fish. I just thought it would lead to more bites. And that's what I thought for sure for a long, long time. And now I'm telling you, after years and years and years of fishing, that's just not true. In fact, especially with these smallmouth and moving water, bigger is often better. At least when you're talking about like hard baits. Soft plastics are maybe a little bit different because, the smaller ones are still a really good choice. Smallmouth especially have smaller mouths. So if you're eating a soft plastic, they do have to get that whole thing in their mouth to get hooked a lot of times. But if I'm talking like hard baits or wire baits or top water, shoot, I think it is the opposite a lot of times. Like I have seen fish eat a 7-inch glide bait when they wouldn't touch a Ned rig or a finesse underspin or a drop shot or a micro chatterbait. I really think, this is going to be a weird analogy, but I think smallmouth are like dogs. Like they just chase, they swipe, they bite, they feed off of each other's reactions and energy. And if they see something big or shiny or something that catches their eye, they want to chase it. I think largemouth are kind of the opposite. They're a little bit more reserved. They're a little bit more calculated a lot of times. Smallies are just the dog that just saw the squirrel. So yes, I have made the move to a lot of bigger baits over the years, big glides, big 3/8 ounce and 1/2 ounce spinner baits, big 1/2 ounce chatterbaits. Now, I will say that especially those last two, a chatterbait and a spinnerbait, a lot of the times that I'm using those heavy weights is because of the depth that I want to get down to and where I want that bait to stay in the water column, especially in current. If you're in those rivers in West Virginia down by you, keeping that bait down is a big deal. So that's where I lean on those 3/8 ounce and 1/2 ounce spinnerbaits and chatterbaits and where they come into play for me. Same with bottom baits. A lot of times it's just more about where you want that bait to stay and how easily you want it to stay there. So over time, yes, my bait selection has gotten a lot heavier and a lot bigger in the rivers. Now, seasonality, I think that's interesting to think about. I think I've changed a little bit on this too. I go smaller in late winter and early spring, and then sort of medium-sized if we're talking like overall profile of baits in the summertime. And then I go back to big baits in the fall. I keep those big baits out into late fall and early winter. And then late winter is kind of where I switch back to those smaller baits. I just think there's this time like midwinter around here where if you take winter out of the equation completely and instead you think about it as, well, am I closer to late fall or am I closer to early spring? That's how I determine if I start going smaller or lighter baits again, is when I start to get closer to early spring than I am to late fall. So it just depends. If I'm trying to hold on to that late fall bite with all my might, then I'm keeping those big baits out. If I've turned the page to early pre-spawn cold water fishing tactics, then I'm going to go to those smaller baits a lot of times. All right, everybody, that is our episode today. Thank you all for tuning in. I appreciate you all. It means a lot that you guys choose to spend your Tuesday with us. If there's anything I can help with, shoot me an email, tackletalkpodcast@gmail.com. Shoot us a DM over on Instagram or Facebook. It's at Tackle Talk Podcast. Find us on the web, tackletalkpodcast.com. Go over there, participate in the show, submit a mailbag question, vote in next week's fishing poll, be a part of next Tuesday's show. That makes it so much more fun. And with that, I will leave you until next week, where I'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.